Okay, you clicked the video, which probably means you're wondering if this is going to be one of those videos where a content creator plays a new TCG and says, "Oh my god, it's so bad," or "It's so good," after really not spending that much time with it in the grand scheme of things. And I'm hoping that you'll agree that the 100 plus in this. Okay, you clicked the video, which probably means you're wondering if this is going to be one of those videos where a content creator plays a new TCG and says, "Oh my god, it's so bad," or "It's so
I
good,"
want to try out
after
some
really not
matchups.
spending that much
I've
time
been
with it in the grand scheme of
so
things.
focused on
And
doing
I'm hoping
stun
that you'll agree that the 100 plus, in this case, hours that I've spent with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is
that I
enough
completely
time for
forgot
me to
that
give some
hyper
thoughts
aggro
about what
decks
I think
are a
about the
thing
game and
some
what I
people
think about
like
the
to play.
experience of learning the game, both as an absolute novice and as a quote-unquote kind of newer player. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty interesting, and I was inspired to learn the game for 3 reasons. Firstly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis came out, and I am primarily a Canadian Highlander player in Magic the Gathering, which is a format that has been points managed for like 20 years at this point. So seeing a new developer planning to manage a card game format entirely with points was really interesting to me. But obviously, I couldn't engage with it because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a complicated game, and just looking at that points list by itself was not approachable. So I wanted to learn how to play so that I could potentially play Genesis. I thought that that seemed like a sweet idea. Nextly, if you're anything like me, your feed has been kind of flooded with these kind of content creators from different TCGs playing each other's games, talking about cards from each other's games, kind of sharing that information. And it has, I think, really created this interesting community around card games that has previously been really siloed for a long, long time. If you were a Magic player, you only played Magic, you didn't really engage with the other trading card games on the market. And the same is true for Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, what have you. And these new videos, I think, are really great in that way, in that they've actually broken down a lot of those barriers. My
At
feed's been
Food
full of
Panda?
them, and the
Fuck.
the ones that I've been the most interested in have been the Yu-Gi-Oh ones, mostly because it's the one game of the kind of big three between like Magic, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh. It's the one that I haven't played. I've played a lot of trading card games. My kind of whole life has been around playing games broadly. I like basically grew up in a local game store. My like 9th birthday was in the basement of one. I remember playing like Warlord in like 1998 as a 6-year-old. So I've spent a lot of time with a lot of trading card games, but Yu-Gi-Oh is the one I've never really played. I played it as a kid, like in elementary school, when my deck included like 12 bubonic vermin, which was not legal, but I thought the card was cute, and if you had a bunch of them, they kept flipping up, and your opponent could never really seemingly kill you. So that's about the engagement that I had with Yu-Gi-Oh before going into this project. And I want to acknowledge what my preconceived notions were about Yu-Gi-Oh before I started playing, because I think it's important to, reckon with those. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I went in with a complete open mind, because the game is old enough and I've been in this community long enough to have some kind of biases and stuff. And so I want to acknowledge those before we start. So I think the common things that I've heard levied against Yu-Gi-Oh as a game is that it is very combo focused, is that it's very zero sum, and that it is very complicated. So by zero sum, I mean one person is basically doing 100% of the game actions and the other player just kind of has to watch. And yeah, combo focus, pretty obvious, but long turns, people playing a lot of cards, and then the other person maybe not getting to do too much. And to be really honest, I viewed those as a negative for a while, and it did delay me in potentially trying the game out. But I actually think most of those might not matter to me. Look, I'm sorry.
Is it end of turn Entomb?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Entomb on the card reader.
Oh, yeah.
So
sorry.
Entomb lets him get any card in his deck and put it directly into his graveyard.
Yeah, this is the best card in my deck.
I thought Grizzlebrand was the best card in your deck.
Well, this card finds Grizzlebrand
Okay,
and
fair.
puts it in the graveyard, so...
Did you rip that off the top?
Oh, yeah. Like, I'm a degenerate combo player. I like taking 10 times the actions of my opponent. So those things actually maybe are positives, not necessarily negatives. But those
Dude,
are
why
the
can't
kind of
I
expectations I'm going into the game with. And
load
I
comments?
want to be clear about that up front. I don't think it's fair. The one other thing I want to say before we get into everything in earnest
the mobile.
is I played on Master Duel, and Master Duel is Konami's digital client, and it's different from paper play in a variety of ways. So most of the things I'm going to be talking about are going to be contextualized for Master Duel, and it's important, I think, to acknowledge that that's true, because unlike basically any other trading card game, the digital client and the paper gameplay are pretty different. They have different band lists. They have different card pools pretty significantly. And so as a result, you're not playing a different game. The rules are the same, but you're basically playing a different format of the same game. And also like things like card availability, card acquisition, that's all going to be different Master Duel versus TCG as well. And I'll talk about TCG a little bit when I feel as though I can talk about it in a way that is informed, but I'm not going to claim to have had the full Yu-Gi-Oh experience necessarily, because I have ultimately only played on Master Duel, but it's the most accessible. So without further ado, let's get into what the process was like of learning Yu-Gi-Oh. Okay, so the basics. The kind of interesting thing about Yu-Gi-Oh is that the basics of the game are not that complicated. And the Master Duel tutorial does a good job of teaching you the core basics of the game. And when I say the core basics of the game, I mean what you can do on your turn. Yu-Gi-Oh is aided, I think, in the fact that its resource system is very different from every other trading card game in that you do not incrementally acquire more resources. In virtually every other trading card game on the market, or as far as I can remember, basically ever, there's this kind of incremental buildup of resources. In Magic, you play lands.
So weird. I'm so used to Yu-Gi-Oh where aggro decks prefer going second,
Star Wars Unlimited,
but aggro decks in Recross and apparently every other game prefer going first.
In Yu-Gi-Oh, that's not the
just
case.
Like every other
You can,
deck
on turn one,
essentially,
with 5 cards in hand,
which is weird.
Basically do the same thing as if you were on turn 5 with 5 cards in hand. There's not some different resource system that so slowly ticks up. And what that means is that you can get right into learning the core mechanics of the game. So the Master Duel tutorial is pretty effective at teaching you how to normal summon monsters, how to tribute summon monsters that have higher level values. It's good at teaching you how certain cards can be special summoned under certain conditions. It teaches you that you have 5 zones for monsters, 5 zones for spells, a field spell zone, which is like a special spell. You have an extra monster zone where if you summon from your extra deck,
I do have
you can put the monster directly there.
I think we'll be fine.
And all things considered, I mean, this is not a video where I'm going to teach you how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, but I can tell you that this process did not take me that long to get to the point of understanding how all the parts in a Yu-Gi-Oh game move. Unfortunately, even though the tutorial system is quite good, it is not especially capable of teaching you what Yu-Gi-Oh games are actually going to feel like. And the reason for that is that a lot of the information in a Yu-Gi-Oh game is esoteric. And I don't mean that in a kind of pejorative, derogatory way of saying, oh, it's too complex. I just mean it in the literal sense of the information in a Yu-Gi-Oh, or how to play a Yu-Gi-Oh game, is very deck specific. Yu-Gi-Oh cards are verbose. They have a lot of text on them typically, and while reading the card typically explains what the card does, in order to understand how a deck functions, you functionally have to read like 30 cards to know exactly how they interface together, and each of the cards can have as much as like 100 lines of or 100 words of text on them. And there aren't really heuristics that you can use to judge how to play the game. Instead, you are pretty dependent on knowing specifically how your deck's engine works and how you can use your non-engine to interact with your opponent. Okay, so trading card games are lexiconally distinct a lot of the time, and I think it is easy to get caught up in assuming that everyone knows all of the words that you are saying, and I want to try to avoid that here. Obviously, I was learning, and so I'm going to use this opportunity to make sure that everyone's on the same page as well. So I've created my Yu-Gi-Oh! Glossary. We'll update this as we go, but engine and non-engine are maybe the most important things to know for the sake of
Wow,
understanding
it's a
what's
whole
going
ass
on when you hear content
presentation. What the
creators
hell?
talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. So engine is just a term for your deck's proactive game plan. It's typically around 2/3 of the cards in your deck are going to be quote-unquote engine cards, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! Engine has a much more robust meaning than in other games. For example, like in Magic the Gathering, we might describe an engine as like Overchase Daredevil Underworld Cookbook, where you can like generate a large number of food tokens. Maybe you throw in an Academy Manufacturer and then you're like really off to the races creating game pieces. In Yu-Gi-Oh, your engine is how you are going to win the game. Typically, you have what are called starters, cards that are the things that start your engine, and they're building towards your eventual way that you're going to win the game. And I'll describe what that is later on. Non-engine tends to be more generic. These are cards that most decks can play, and you'll see a lot of decks playing the same non-engine cards. And again, we'll talk about those more in specific later. But these are interactive pieces. They are things that you are going to use to try and stop your opponent. And importantly, they typically don't have unique synergy with advancing your own game plan. They're mostly used to try and deny your opponent's advancement. That's not like 100% true, but broadly speaking, you can think of engine proactive, non-engine interactive. This emphasis on engine and non-engine and understanding how your engine works means that relatively early on in the process of learning how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, you need to choose a deck and you need to choose a kind of archetype that you're going to learn. Because you kind of can't just jump in and learn broad basics that will then subsequently apply to a swath of decks, it really does benefit you to lock in on something early and maybe pick the archetype that suits your kind of playstyle the best. There are, broadly speaking, in Yu-Gi-Oh, I would say 5 distinct archetypes. There are combo decks, and I know early on we talked about the fact that there's this preconceived notion that every deck in Yu-Gi-Oh is a combo deck, and that's kind of true, but typically combo decks in Yu-Gi-Oh are the ones that are taking like really a lot of game actions and are looking to set up, if unimpeded, a truly uninteractable board. They're going to kill you by likely preventing you from taking your next turn. The offset is that typically these combo decks, if they are appropriately balanced, tend to have more points of interaction in them where you can disrupt them along the way, and it will result in them building a much less powerful board if you disrupt them midway through their combo. This is in kind of a contrast to mid-range decks, which are also obviously a lot of the time trying to use their engine to build a board that is going to make it challenging for their opponent to win. The trade-off is typically the end boards in mid-range decks are less powerful, but they are easier to get to and harder to disrupt. Another glossary term, I didn't think I'd be back here so quickly, but end board, very broadly speaking, is what you are planning to pass the turn with. It's pretty simple. Ideally, your end board features a bunch of points of interaction, either through monsters or spell trap cards, and you're trying to either make a board that is very hard to interact with for your opponent, or you're trying to make a board that is going to interact with your opponent and prevent them from kind of taking a bunch of game actions and killing you on their turn. So yeah, that's what an end board is. Next, we have control decks. Control decks are similar to most other card games, honestly. The difference is that a lot of the time in Yu-Gi-Oh, a control deck is going to be kind of centered around playing trap cards. Trap cards are a bit of a maligned place in Yu-Gi-Oh because going first is so powerful currently, it can often be challenging to be able to set up your trap cards. If you're playing one of these control decks and you go second and your opponent does their thing on their first turn, and you're staring at a bunch of trap cards you can't play. Not ideal, but that's typically what a control deck looks like. There are other variants as well that are looking to go second, allow their opponent to deploy a board, and then have filled their decks with ways to interact with the board after it's been developed. Those are also control decks. Then we have a kind of
They're not level
subset of
3 yet,
control
my
called
bad.
stun in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is probably something that should go in the glossary, but I'll just explain it here. Stun is what we in Magic would think of as a prison deck. This is a style of deck that is looking to employ game pieces that prevent your opponent from playing the game fully. And then lastly, this is, I think, the most unique to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck archetype. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is what's referred to as a Towers deck. The idea with these decks is that they are trying to eventually put onto the board a monster that their opponent literally cannot beat. Either that means putting something in play that has text that says it that can't be targeted, can't be destroyed, etc., putting something on the board that is so big it can't be attacked over. This is not really something that we see in other card games in quite the same way, just because of the way that the mechanics of those games typically work. But yeah, Towers decks are kind of another sub-archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. Choosing a deck for Master Duel was kind of weird for me and a little bit frustrating. Like most digital TCG games, Master Duel gives you a lot of freebies right up front so that you can open a number of packs. They want to get you in the door, they want to get you playing, which is great. And the freebies at first are pretty generous. But what do you do with those gems? How do you spend them? What are you supposed to buy? This is something that I think specifically Master Duel, and this is not a broad Yu-Gi-Oh! Problem, but a specific Master Duel problem. I think this is something that Master Duel does really poorly. Here are a couple of the things that are really frustrating. Number one, when you are opening packs in Master Duel, you are given the option to open 1 pack or 10 packs. If you open 1 pack, you have kind of set odds as to what you're going to open, what you can open. And there's 4 rarities. There's N, R, SR, and UR. UR being ultra rare, the most rare, SR being secret rare, the second most rare. And N and R are, these cards are so common that you might as well not think about them. If they are Ns or Rs, you're never going to think about having to acquire them. It'll be trivial to get them. However, Master Duel specifically, basically every deck is gated around how many URs are in the deck. Because the way that the system works is you can dust additional cards that you have. You can turn them into what are called crafting points, but the crafting points are gated to each specific rarity. And so what that means is that, like, unlike games like Hearthstone or Shadowverse, Universes Beyond, where you just have a pool of crafting resources that everything goes into, you actually have to open the specific rarity to be able to disassemble them to then be able to craft the new rarity. So on top of all of this, I mentioned that you can open 1 or 10. If you open a 10 pack and you brick on getting a UR, you are guaranteed in your next 10 pack to open a UR. If you just open a single pack 10 times, you are not afforded that same guarantee. And this sort of obfuscation of that information that's not communicated anywhere means that it's really easy to spew these free resources that you get early on in a way that doesn't advance you towards actually acquiring a deck at a meaningful pace. So that's awkward, to say the least, and is certainly one of the main pain points that I experienced. I learned this before I started crafting, and before I started opening packs, which meant that I went in, I think, a little more aware than the average player would, but it still was pretty frustrating to have to deal with. The other thing I will say is that Master Duel is really not very free-to-play friendly. You get those free resources early on, which will get you to a tiered meta strategy relatively quickly. We'll talk about how long it took me to get to one. I did it at first free to play. I did eventually end up spending some money on the game, but at first I started off free to play because I think that's more accurate for how a lot of people would try the game. And if you mess up how you allocate the free resources and then you don't want to spend money, you can end up in a position where you just don't have a deck, which I think is a pretty significant pain point and is really not ideal. And the upshot of all of this means that when you are starting out trying to choose a deck, you are very incentivized to go onto one of these sites that has metagame data and to choose a meta strategy and to only work towards acquiring cards for that strategy, especially URs. You really can't afford to spend UR crafting points on things that are not going to go into your eventual final deck because you just won't have enough. And you also are really incentivized to only open packs that contain cards that would go in your deck. And again, that's not super clearly communicated, and there are so many packs in this system that it can be a pretty daunting thing to approach. Lastly, even though you get a decent amount of free resources, a lot of them are gated behind playing the single player content, and that's fine. I actually don't mind that. I think that it's good that you get some experience playing single player, you can engage with some of the engines in the game, but the downside is, one, it takes a lot of time to kind of acquire all of the free resources, and when you're playing a trading card game, you'd ideally like to play against other humans eventually. And two, most of those single player events, although they're teaching you how engines work, these are not engines that are going to appear in games that you're then going to subsequently play on the ladder or even in the casual rooms. They just aren't decks that people register anymore. They're not as powerful. They're not powerful enough. So definitely some weird pain points there. And I think that this is maybe the weakest part of Master Duel is the card acquisition, the obfuscation on how card acquisition works, and the lack of information on how the kind of top meta strategies work. I think that it would be easy for a new player getting in who was not going to engage with a bunch of the external resources of Master Duel to just end up having a really frustrating experience. And I probably spent like maybe 10 hours doing research on websites, watching YouTube videos about different decks before I was able to lock in on what I was going to learn how to play. And I think that that's unfortunate. So ultimately, here's where I ended up starting. I think in retrospect, if I had done more research, I might have done this slightly differently. But what I did was I knew that there was a NR festival, basically like the equivalent in Magic the Gathering as like Pauper, like a format where you are not allowed to play SRs and URs. And as a result, you wouldn't have to spend SR or UR crafting materials to build the deck. And I thought, well, for the early ranks of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ranked ladder, I feel like one of these decks that's playable in this format is just going to be good enough and proactive enough to be playable in the regular format. This was kind of true, but I think if I had had it all to do over again, there are a couple of structure decks, which are basically like starter decks that do have some URs and SRs in them. A few of those are strong enough to be playable on the ladder. In particular, I think the Raid Raptor starter deck, if you're interested in getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! And you're looking for a better way to start than I did, you can spend like 1,000 gems, which is pretty trivial at the start from your freebies, and get the Raid Raptor structure deck twice, and that'll get you pretty close to just what the meta Raid Raptor build is. And while that deck is by no means a strong meta contender, it is a powerful enough deck that it would carry you through the early ranks quite comfortably if you learned how to play it. But that's not what I did. I instead went and found the NR OTK deck of my dreams. I really like playing combo decks, and so I figured let's start with a combo deck. So this is Spider OTK, and basically what this deck does is it is attempting to use Mother Spider Splitter to go get the 3 baby spiders out of your deck. Then when you have your baby spiders, you can tribute one of these to make them capable of summoning this one, the number 35. Then you contribute this one from your extra deck to get this one, number 48, Pain Gainer, which just gives it more material. And then ultimately, you contribute up into number 77, the Seven Sins. This monster has 4,000 attack and is a pretty powerful boss monster, actually. It's capable of detaching material from it to prevent it from dying, which is also quite nice. And it can get rid of things on the board, which is good as well. I used another glossary term, and I didn't even really give myself a good pause to explain it. But boss monster is pretty easy to explain. A boss monster is a monster that typically requires a significant investment. That's what what your engine is working towards, is putting your boss monster on the field. And these monsters typically can win the game by themselves, or more or less win the game by themselves, if left unchecked, or they are highly interactive. So there you go. Glossary term. The upshot is, like, this deck, and then subsequently, sorry, the last part of the combo, the important part, is that you can banish one of these baby spiders from your graveyard and get back into play a large spider from your graveyard. So what happens is you chain all the way up to the Seven Deadly Sins, which is a 4,000 attack monster. And then in the process of doing so, you detach some
I
material from it
completely forgot you
for the
could
cost
pay
of the
enter
baby
to ignore
spider.
the
The
attack.
material you
That's
detach is
hilarious.
number 35, Ravenous Tarantula, which you then get to resummon with the baby spider. The Ravenous Tarantula says, all monsters you control gain attack and defense equal to the difference between your life points and your opponent's life points. And importantly, the baby spider's effect
All right, let's
costs half your life
try.
points. So the basic idea is get Mother Spider into play, get 3 babies, get 7 Sins in play,
Try
pay half
Alpha
your
4
life
now.
points to go down to
I'm
4,000
still very
to
much
put
not a fan.
Ravenous Tarantula
It
into
does
play.
feel nice,
And then
but like this is
you will
definitely
have
not
an 8,000 attacking the 7 Sins, and you'll be able
ideal.
to kill your
I
opponent
feel
with
like
1 attack. Now, if you're coming from a different card game, this sounds absurd that a kind of like pauper deck with no SRs or URs, like no ultra rare cards, just kills your opponent on the first turn. But this is just what Yu-Gi-Oh is like. And the reality is that this deck is actually, if you're an enfranchised Yu-Gi-Oh player, you know that this deck is bad. You know, like the deck has a lot of weaknesses. The fact that everything runs through one specific card means that if you can just stop that card from activating its effect, you probably win the game. But that's what I started with. At the same time, though, when I was playing early duels with Spider OTK, I was also
I don't want to
building
rely on
towards
Carnival's
a
ability because
tiered meta strategy.
we want to get
And
the
the
enter off
tiered
of
meta strategy
Alpha.
that I was building towards, as you probably saw in my little B-roll that I was playing while I was talking about deck selections, was Mitsurugi. And Mitsurugi is a meta strategy, typically when paired with something else. It's less meta these days than it was before, but you know, it's a meta strategy. And just as a little bit of info, I'm recording this quite a long time after I've played. I started playing. Like we're like fully 2 months after I started playing. So a lot of other cards have come out. Things have changed. The metagame has adapted. But this is the deck that I started with. And it took me a
We
while to
always hit the level
acquire,
3.
but this deck is a
2
lot
is
more robust,
still
and there
good.
were a
Let's
lot
go.
more combo lines to learn.
Fuck me.
I really liked playing this deck, though. This deck is a mid-range deck. It is not the most complicated in the world to set up, and the things that it's trying to do are interactive, but not so interactive that like you can never do anything about it. But the trade-off is it's easier to get to your powerful end board pieces. So yeah, that was my deck selection process experience. It was an interesting one, to be sure, and I definitely found that I struggled in the early days playing Spider OTK. I think that there was a real issue where like there was not a lot of good information out there for me as to what I should be playing in the first couple of ranks, so that I didn't have to spend SR and UR crafting points. I think that had I known earlier that you could maybe go with a structure deck or something like that, maybe that would have improved things. But it did take me like a couple of weeks to get to the point where I was building this Mitsurugi deck and able to play it on the ranked ladder. And I think that if I had been much more aggressive in dismantling URs that didn't go in the deck, I would have put it together faster, but it would have been at the expense of retaining cards that could be played in other decks down the line. And I don't think that that's necessarily how I think you should approach a digital trading card game like this. Like, my general philosophy is I'm not going to disassemble things that I think might eventually go in a deck that I might play, unless I'm going to fully decide I'm always going to disassemble cards for that archetype as soon as they come up. And early on, how are you supposed to know that? It's pretty challenging, right, to engage with what archetypes you're going to like, what you're not going to like. And so, yeah, it was difficult, to say the least. But overall, I think that once I got the decks together and once I kind of understood the process a bit more, it was okay. It was manageable eventually. But getting to that point was certainly non-trivial. I realized as I was editing that I think I missed one pretty key piece of context and piece of advice that I would give new players trying to start playing on Master Duel. This is Master Duel Meta, the website I'm talking about for finding like tiered meta strategies. And one thing that's important to note is like the submission methods for this website, it's largely community submitted, which means that although technically there are lots of decks that have like a couple of people who have performed well with them, let's click Sprite, for example, right? Like there's, 2 different players who have had decent finishes in the last 2 weeks with this deck. If you are new to the game and you're just getting into it on Master Duel, I would really, really recommend starting with a deck that is more high up on the tier list and has more representation. So like anything in the tier list is obviously great, but then also like if you're looking here at this list, like I would not be picking anything with less than say like maybe 5 or 6 entries in the last 2 weeks. Just because if it has less than that, it likely means that the deck's power level isn't high enough for people to just be naturally ending up with decent finishes with it. It could also just mean it's unpopular, like it doesn't necessarily have it to correlate to power. But just as a suggestion for like what you should do, I would start with something like in this kind of range. That's certainly what I did. I picked Mitsurugi because it was a tier 2 deck at the time, and it seemed like a reasonable place to start. And I would not, for example, like decide that I want to start with, a Sulfachord or Lightsworn or Gimmick Puppet unless you really, really do the research and decide this is exactly how I want to play. If stuff has lower representation on the tier list, it's going to be much harder to, I think,
Oh,
have
well,
good games that you
if
can kind of
Gimmick
learn from
Puppet's the
because the
kind of
deck is
deck you want
either
to play,
not very good
fuck
or
you.
very hard to play or it's unpopular, and it's typically unpopular for a reason. So anyway, just one other quick piece of context. Now, if you've made it this far in the video and you are thinking, geez, we're like half an hour in and he hasn't really talked about gameplay yet. Firstly, thank you for staying for half an hour without me talking about gameplay. And I guess if you stayed this long, subscribe, maybe that would be nice. But also, I kind of did this on purpose because this experience mirrors what my learning experience was like. I spent a lot of time learning how to play and learning how to build a deck before I ever really got a chance to get in and play. And the reason for that is a specific to Master Duel issue, I think. Essentially, once you get out of the beginner ranks of Master Duel, you are just going to play against people who are playing either meta strategies or off meta, kind of like rogue brews. But everything in Yu-Gi-Oh is powerful. And even decks that are tier 6, not good, will kill you on the first turn of the game if you don't interact with them or if you don't understand how to interact with them. And what that means is that actually getting in and starting to play can feel, I think, pretty unapproachable. This informed my decision to play like an OTK deck with basically no interaction early on because I knew that this was the case and figured, well, if I'm going to be playing matches against people who are proactively going to be trying to kill me on the first turn of the game, I'm not going to know enough about how their decks work to try and play a game of interacting with them and setting up disruptions. I'm better off just trying to force through a win on my turn. And that's what I did. I was able to climb pretty quickly up to gold playing Spider OTK. Obviously, at the earlier ranks, you can't lose rating for losing, which means that like it's just about how many games you win. But I did get up there like relatively quickly. And then once I hit gold, I hit a wall. The Spider OTK deck just stopped working. I was playing against people who were playing many of the meta strategies or people who were playing kind of like tier 2 strategies. And it became increasingly clear to me that I basically needed to just go grind solo mode to get the last couple of gems that I needed to finish my Mitsurugi deck and so that I could actually be playing a more meta strategy. I think that that doesn't have to be the case. I think that you can probably get farther on a budget strategy than I did, but that information is not out there, I gotta say. I looked relatively hard for budget, like no UR competitive Master Duel decks, and they kind of just don't exist. And this is a deliberate point on Konami's sake. Like, they get to set the rarity, and they often are going to set cards to UR in Master Duel that are not ultra rare or not super rare in the paper game because they need people to want to buy packs. And it makes sense. I'm not knocking it, but it does make the introductory process a little bit challenging. So the Spider OTK games went well right up until the point that they didn't. And then I switched to playing Mitsurugi. Finally getting a chance to play a tiered meta strategy was a big deal, I think, for my enjoyment of the game. I had actually been kind of close to burning out on playing with the Spider OTK deck, and I was getting frustrated. I wasn't enjoying the games as much. Losing to Ryziel over and over again was exceptionally frustrating, and I'm really glad that I was able to switch to the meta strategy when I did, because once I started playing Mitsurugi, I started to get to the point where I felt like I could make informed
I don't know, Matt.
choices. When
I
I was
feel like that was the
playing the
best
Spider
play we
OTK
could have
deck,
done, but
my plan was
it didn't
basically
work
like
out.
throw
So
my hand
obviously I
traps
knew about Unknown
at my
Surprise,
opponent.
but even thinking about
I did
that,
it again.
I
I set
still
a
don't
glossary
really
term.
know
I've been
what
giving
else I could
myself a
have
lot
done
of time.
here
A hand trap is
that
really
could have guaranteed a
easy. It is
kill.
a card that
So
can be activated
no kill
from hand.
guaranteed.
Typically, they're a monster, but it can also be a literal trap card.
Uh,
These are important in
I mean, we
Yu-Gi-Oh!
know it's not
Because
a
if
life
you are the
burst.
player going second, you can't activate spells or traps typically. You have to set them, or it has to be your turn. Hand traps are the exception to this rule. They can be used on the first turn of the game, meaning that the player going second has a chance to interact with the player going first. And then hope for the best. I had like slowly upgraded the deck with some of the non-engine pieces that I had acquired that I was going to put in my Mitsurugi deck, but it just wasn't really working. And when I switched over to playing Mitsurugi, I started to have the kinds of games that I think make people fall in love with Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game. I got to start making informed choices. Was I going to use my Ash Blossom here? Was I going to wait for the next part of their combo to try and maybe tag an extender instead of the starter? Do I think that I can get them to overextend into my Murakumo? These were all decisions that I got to make, and I really felt like with the Spider OTK deck, I learned how the combo worked, and then it was kind of like, I'm going to flip a coin, maybe my opponent stops me, and maybe they don't. But I didn't have a lot of games that really devolved into a game where both players made a lot of decisions, and comparatively, playing Mitsurugi was really enjoyable, and I had a lot of games with interesting choices. Now, to be clear, there are tons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that still end up being zero sum, where you don't open any hand traps and you die on the first turn of the game because your
Just
opponent sets
win
up a
now,
board you
right?
can't break. That's annoying, it's frustrating. It happens. The good news is those games are not every game. I think that you will find people who are very doom and gloom about the game who would like to represent that as the situation. But I think as long as the metagame is in a relatively healthy state, that shouldn't really be the case. And I should note, speaking about metagame state, I think I joined at a good point because Master Duel, from my understanding, for about the previous year before I started playing, had been dominated by one strategy, this Malice strategy, which was like tier 0 and really unfun to play against. And finally, when I started playing, it had finally tanked an actual ban. And actually, during the time that I've been playing, it has subsequently been hit on the ban list again. And now I think Master Duel is in a really healthy metagame state where there's lots of decks you can play that are very fun. And I've been having a lot of fun playing Mitsurugi into most of these matchups. And I do think it's pretty interesting that, it took, I would say, across playing games, across consuming content, across, playing solo mode, I'm thinking it took me about 40-ish hours to hit the point of making informed choices. That is to
and now the
say,
game's
I
actually
wasn't
just
just
over.
pressing buttons. I wasn't just using my hand traps when they popped up on screen as an option. I was
So
thinking
fucking
about,
lucky,
is
dude.
this the right
There was
time to
still
do
a good
this?
chance Hanayo
Am
might
I
have
going to
won
push
that, but
this way? What path am I going to take in trying to develop my engine? What cards do I think they can have that I could try to play around? I think it was around 40 hours to get to that point. And that's with a mid-range deck. Mitsurugi is a mid-range deck. It has flexibility, and that flexibility is a good thing in the sense that you have lots of options, but I will admit that it is probably a little harder to learn a deck like that because you have to take different roles in different matchups. I did, as mentioned previously, ultimately end up spending some money in order to get a couple of other strategies. And this is one of the dark sides about Master Duel, especially. You can't really, as a free to play player, jump between decks super quickly. It's going to take around a month typically to acquire the gems required to get enough packs to jump from deck to deck, which is unfortunate. And I think that
yeah,
is something that
I think Unknown
like
Surprise
if
is
you're
really
looking at
good.
kind of the gold
It's
standard for digital
only
card games, it's definitely Runeterra. That game
one
didn't
point of
make any money
damage
because
protection
its system was so
for
friendly, but
at
there's
minimum
got to be some
2,
middle ground. It's interesting. I've seen
but
some
it does
content
have the
creators
recursion as
describe Master
well.
Duel's monetization system as generous, and I think that that is
Yeah, I
untrue.
feel like in a lot of
Even if you go and
matchups
look
we're
at
not
something
gonna
like,
be
say,
able
like
to
Magic Arena, which
because
when it released
the
was rough, and if you
reason
want to be collection complete is rough,
Yurith is always
but at
able to
least the
cast this as
information
just
is all
2 is
face
because
up. A lot of the
they are
frustrations
for
that
the
I
most
think
part
I
just
have
trying to
with
mill
Master
themselves.
Duel are related to the fact that the
Alpha
information
though,
is
I
closed door, and it's a
prefer
lot harder to know
being
how far
ahead
away
rather
you are
than
from
being
building other
behind.
decks. But I
Also,
did build
I
other
really don't
decks,
like
and
Gamigan.
despite all of these frustrations, I built a couple other decks in order to have some other experiences in the games. So I ended up playing Luna Light as well, which I think is maybe one of my favorite decks that I've played in the game so far.
It
Luna
isn't
Light is a
entirely bad, I
towers
suppose,
deck
to have
where
our
you're basically trying to combo to put a Liger Dancer in play, which is this big boss monster that can't be interacted with. And I had a lot of fun playing Luna Light, and I do think
own
that
deck
I've
milled
decided
a
that
little
that's
faster.
probably more closely where my playstyle aligns. As much fun as I've had playing Mitsurugi, I think that playing one of these kind of more combo towersy decks is something that I would be interested in going forward. But playing both Luna Light and Mitsurugi, I did eventually hit Diamond, which is decent. Like Master is the highest rank, and then there are rating duels beyond that. And I haven't hit Master yet. And to an extent,
Alright,
that's just a matter of
one
how many
last
games you're
test.
willing to play in a month. But once you get
What's
past,
like a
I believe
deck
it's
we
platinum,
know,
you start
I know
losing
that
rating each time you
isn't
lose a game. So
gonna
getting from platinum to
overtake
diamond
me in
is
terms
like
of
the
mills.
first actual rank up where you have to more or less win more games than you lose. There is a floor for losses, so you could probably technically rank
I
up
guess I can
despite
try
having a
Mugen.
negative win rate. I don't think I do have a negative win rate though. I'm pretty sure my win rate is positive the last month or two, and I've been having a lot of fun. I think that the games that are good are really good, and I think that the games that are not good, you can surrender pretty early at least, which is which is not the end of the world. To wrap things up and to kind of stop rambling, I think that Yu-Gi-Oh is a good game that severely lacks on ramps for new players. There are a ton of moments where the game provides you a good reason to quit and doesn't really hold players' hands through those moments. Examples would be the crafting system is rough. Going from playing the tutorial and the single player missions into actually playing against real opponents is rough. Uh, Experiencing negative variance related to like hand traps and getting max seed is really rough. The games where your opponent does a million things on the first turn and you feel like you can do nothing are rough. And if there were easier ways to get into the game and to kind of ramp up into those
Doesn't
experiences,
matter
I
if
think
I put
that you would
anything down, so
provide
I'm not gonna put
players
anything
fewer
down.
opportunities to decide that they were going to bail. Because I'll be honest, I think if I hadn't been planning to make this video when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh, there's a non-zero chance that, you know, right around when I was in gold, losing to all these meta strategies and, you know, these random strategies, there's a really good chance that I could have just left the game and decided this isn't worth my time. I'm going to go do something else. I kept playing for multiple reasons, but I think that it would be really easy to decide not to. The game is also really fast, and it's also punishing to wrong choices in a way that is challenging to engage with at first. The extra deck in particular, and I didn't touch on this initially, but the extra deck in particular means that decks are so consistent that,
Okay
like I
then.
mentioned a couple of times, like even tier 6 or 7 strategies can kill you on the first turn that they get. And that's challenging to engage with if you're coming from another card game. In a world where increasingly card game designers are shifting towards maximizing the amount of equality in actions and time that players have, Yu-Gi-Oh really stands out as kind of a stalwart in not following that paradigm at all. And I think that in a lot of ways, the game is kind of stuck. They have created this system where you get to feel very powerful when you go off and you do your thing, and your opponent potentially doesn't feel very powerful and doesn't get to do anything. And you compare this to like One Piece or Star Wars Unlimited, or you compare this to the new League. You compare this to Riftbound. All of these games are trying to maximize the amount of engagement that both players have. So the kind of regardless of the outcome of the game, you feel like you've made choices. And Yu-Gi-Oh can't. They have built their brand on being the game where you get to do big flashy things, and they also can't afford to make those big flashy things faster. That's the kind of power creep that I think would be ultimately quite bad for the game if they made it so that going from your combo starter to your end board with a boss monster, if that only took 2 or 3 cards, decks could just include too many of them and become incredibly problematic to deal with. Yu-Gi-Oh has to have longer combos that are deterministic but provide multiple points of interaction, because otherwise the game just would totally spiral out of control. What this means is that if you're a new player and you make a mistake in your combo, you probably lose the game because your opponent will either kill you on their turn or they'll get to punish you and interact with you in a way that maybe shouldn't have necessarily been possible. And the nature of interaction in Yu-Gi-Oh as well is such that when you make the wrong choice and you play into a hand trap in a way that maybe you didn't need to, you can feel like those things are unbeatable. And it's pretty easy, I think, to have that be another quit moment. The one advantage is I think that this experience that I'm describing is probably more of a Master Duel problem than it would be in the TCG. if you were playing in paper and you were playing in a community with people who were, meaningfully interested in helping you get into the game, whether you're playing with friends or maybe just people at the local game store who actually care about growing their community, you might get takebacks. You might get casual games where people might give you an idea of, oh, you should have done this differently. Oh, don't do this because it will play into this card that I could have that is commonly played. But on Master Duel, you don't get that luxury. On Master Duel, your opponent is playing for their fake internet points, and they're going to kill you to take them from you, which I think is a real downside, and it's an unfortunate one for sure. And it's especially sad because once you start making those informed choices and you start getting into those games where there's back and forth and both players get to do things and you have to make decisions about what you want to interact with and how you want to stack your chains so that you can maybe block something from being interacted with, the games are really cool and you can feel a level of skill expression that doesn't really exist in a lot of other card games. I likened learning Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was learning it to kind of like learning a fighting game. There is a requisite amount of knowledge that you need specifically about your deck and also specifically about your opponent's decks to even really be able to play. In fighting games, we have this concept, right, where you can be plus on block or minus on block, which essentially means when I make this attack, do I get to keep making attacks or do I have to now defend because you have the opportunity to hit me back if I missed? And you have to know this frame data at a high level in order to know how you are supposed to operate in certain matchups. Obviously, you can just jump in and play fighting games and just have fun too. But if you're trying to play like competitively, like these are things that matter. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kind of the same way. Because every deck has its own engine, its own kind of esoteric way about going about things, it is challenging to make generalized approaches to attacking other decks. If you don't know how that starter connects to this extender, which connects to this end board, you don't know when to use your hand trap necessarily. That means that unlike in a game of Magic, where I can kind of go by heuristics, I can make approximations about what I think a matchup is about based on other similar types of matchups I've played in the past. Like if I'm playing a tempo deck against a control deck, I know that I need to develop threats early because if I let the control deck make land drops, I'm going to lose. That's general knowledge. That doesn't exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Playing against Mitsurugi is going to be completely different to playing against Draco Tail, which is going to be completely different to playing against like Mermail Atlantean, like a combo deck, right? These are all very different decks that require very specific knowledge. And once you get that specific knowledge and you can engage with the game in that way, it feels really cool to be able to make these choices and say, I think that my opponent is going to aim to go through this card. And so I can play around that and try and make it so that that isn't going to work. And I think that it would be easy to look at Yu-Gi-Oh! And to look at the combos and to look at how fast the games are and say, oh, these are low skill games. When in fact, I actually think the games are really high skill and unfortunately, potentially too high skill. I think ultimately that might be the thing that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Not approachable for new players, is that how are you supposed to engage with this game that takes 20 or 30 hours to, even start to learn how to play and to get onto the ladder. And then once you start to play on the ladder, you're going to be playing against a ton of different strategies, all of which require their own esoteric knowledge. And how do you do it? Ultimately, I had fun. I really enjoyed getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm now, I would say, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. I've continued to play. K9 just released on Master Duel. I'm in the process of acquiring that deck. I now have like pretty specific opinions about which strategies I think are fun and which strategies I think are really unfair. As a brief aside, I think it's fascinating that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community thinks that Draco Tail is this like reasonable deck to have be the best deck in the format when I think it's miserable. Like clearly none of these people played modern Magic the Gathering in 2013 when Deathrite Shaman Jund was the best strategy and they all got mid-range to death. Like I know that Draco Tail is fair, but holy God, man, is it frustrating for me to play against. And I think that's cool. I'm excited that I have like a new trading card game that I get to have opinions and feelings about. But I do worry that getting to that point for other people might not be that easy. Overall, I think Yu Gi Oh is really fun, and my first 100 hours were enjoyable. And if you want to try it, I think you should. And I think that, maybe this video can give you a slightly faster pathway and maybe somewhat of an on ramp to get into the game so that you can have a good time faster than I did. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, comment, and let me know if you think that I'm nuts, if it took me too long to learn things. And, also, if you're interested, comment other games you think I should learn. I have played a lot of TCGs, but I'm basically down to learn any of them. With all that, I'll see you next time.
Now that we have milled the opponent out, we are able to do it at 2 cost. We can also just use it as cost for Trident Thunder. That's always the option, the alternative option. Should have swapped these around. What can you do sometimes? Let's pretend I did. And it never even mattered. I think we simply want to be as big as possible. Very nice. Or I can try to guarantee I'll be taking 1 less damage. I don't know which one is the correct choice. The bigger the better. I'm metagaming that I know they have the level 4, but nah. It's very useful. Kinda glad I couldn't get to pay. But the top 6 of my own, I take 1 damage for no real reason. $13, $25 is not enough. I can still deal 1 more damage with Sayuragi. We do minus 1000 for each demon, and we have like we have 22 demons in our thing right now. I think unironically the best play is to just I mean I want to save I want to save the Enter for double Piton. Either way, we're gonna deal 1 more damage because we're gonna deck them out again somehow. I'm fine with this. We can also choose to mill ourselves once, get 1 more Enter guarantee. So either way, we're still gonna be able to draw without decking out, so yeah, sure. Oh, but now I won't be able to kill them. Right, that was their life burst, it never mattered. Oh, why does it only bounce? Oh wait, I should have given that to... Although I'm not sure if that would have guaranteed the safety of Remember. Because I don't know what triggers first. Yeah, whatever. Oh, right, it's a recollect. Shit, dude. I still can't use it. "19 out of 32. And it would have actually been enough. And why does it have to be a recollect? No, I lose because I'm a fucking moron. I should probably just deck myself out. Blizzard Trident Thunder is gonna still guarantee we get some semblance of safety, depending on how they choose to play. I just realized I don't have any enter. I'm fucking dead. I can't even Trident Thunder. I still think that's pretty good for the most part, though. Uh, but yeah, the recollect is very much a problem. Is Urith also a recollect? I need to I want to know. Yeah, but hers is about recursion. I don't know, this is still the better way to do it. Yeah, if I play something proactive, it'll be easier to trigger the recollect, but we need the defense, dude. Maybe I replace double piton instead. No, I really need the defenses. No way I can play against other aggro decks. Ugh, this level 4 just fucking sucks. Not to mention, this is so dang expensive. I could try going back to Black Wish. It costs one less ener, and protects us the exact same way, for the exact same amount, pretty much. It's arguably better since it doesn't have the recollect cost attached to it, meaning I can just try to play it at any point I'm hugely threatened. And yeah, it's free. Yeah, I don't see the reason to play the Black Wish over. Because like yeah, there's no need to bother with recollects. The only recollect we can really afford is the level 4.